The Sultan's palace, once a beacon of joy and laughter, now stood draped in black. The air, thick with the scent of incense and sorrow, carried the hushed whispers of servants moving like shadows through the marble halls. Sultan Hassan, ruler of these vast lands, sat alone in his chambers, his gaze fixed on a portrait of his beloved sultana, her gentle smile forever captured in paint. Her passing, a mere moon ago, had left a gaping void in his heart, a wound that time seemed only to deepen. He had vowed never to remarry, to hold her memory sacred, his love for her an eternal flame. The court, however, was a restless sea of ambition. The Sultan's grief was seen as weakness, an opportunity for those who craved power. Whispers of potential successors and advantageous alliances filled the air, each courtier vying for the Sultan's favor, hoping to fill the void left by the Sultana. Foremost among them was Lord Zahir, the deceased Sultana's brother. A man of sharp features and sharper ambition, Zahir had positioned himself as the Sultan's closest advisor, his influence growing with each passing day. He spoke of loyalty and duty, but his heart held only the desire for control, the throne itself his ultimate prize. Any woman who might capture the Sultan's affection, any hint of a new queen, was a threat to Zahir's carefully laid plans. He watched, waited and plotted, a serpent coiled in the Sultan's inner circle. The palace, though draped in mourning for the Sultana, was also cloaked in the invisible threads of Zahir's ambition. A silent battle for power waged in the shadows of grief. The funeral feast, a somber affair of hushed voices and downcast eyes, was held in the palace's grand courtyard. Black cloth draped the marble pillars, and the scent of lilies hung heavy in the air. Servants moved silently, offering platters of dates and figs, their faces reflecting the court's collective grief. Among them, almost invisible in her simple mourning garb, was Afsana. A slave girl of barely 20 years, she possessed a beauty that was both striking and ethereal. Raven hair framed a face of delicate features, her violet eyes holding a depth of sadness that belied her young age. Sold into slavery as a child, she had learned to navigate the complexities of palace life by staying silent, her presence as unobtrusive as the shadows she seemed to inhabit. Her only solace was the oud, a stringed instrument she played with, a skill that could stir even the coldest heart. Tonight, however, her fingers were still, her duty to serve, not to soothe. As she knelt before Sultan Hassan, offering him a cup of spiced tea, her sleeve slipped, revealing a delicate silver chain around her wrist. Attached to it was a ring, a single sapphire gleaming like a captured star. Sultan Hassan, lost in his grief, barely registered her presence until the glint of the sapphire caught his eye. It was identical to a ring his late sultana had worn, a treasured gift from her father. His gaze snapped up, meeting Afsana's violet eyes, and a jolt went through him. It wasn't just the ring. There was something in her features, a delicate curve of her cheek, the tilt of her chin, that echoed a portrait of his wife in her youth, a portrait he kept hidden in his private chambers. Time seemed to stop. The murmur of the court faded away. In that single charged moment, a spark ignited within the grieving sultan, a flicker of something he thought long extinguished. He stared speechless, the cup of tea forgotten in his hand. Afsana, startled by his intense gaze, quickly adjusted her sleeve, hiding the ring once more. She lowered her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest, unaware of the profound impact she had just made. The days that followed the funeral were a blur of empty rituals and hollow condolences. Sultan Hassan found himself increasingly drawn to the place where he had last seen the slave girl with the sapphire ring. He would wander through the palace gardens, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, his heart filled with a strange mixture of grief and a burgeoning curiosity. He knew her name was Afsana. He had learned it from the head eunuch, who, sensing the Sultan's interest, discreetly provided him with this small piece of information. Their first encounter after the funeral was brief. Hassan found her tending to the orange blossoms in his private garden, her fingers gently coaxing a wilted petal back to life. He stopped, watching her in silence, the scent of the blossoms filling the air. She sensed his presence and turned, her violet eyes widening slightly in recognition. She bowed low, her hands clasped before her. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on her face, searching for the echo of his lost love. He asked about the flowers, their care, their fragrance. She answered softly, her voice melodious, her words carefully chosen. The conversation was short, punctuated by long silences, but it left Hassan with a sense of peace he hadn't felt since the Sultana's passing. He sought her out again a few days later, this time in the music room. He had heard whispers of her skill with the oud, and he longed to hear the melodies that might have soothed his wife in her youth. He found her seated on a low stool, the oud resting on her lap. He asked her to play, and she did, her slender fingers plucking the strings with a skill that belied her years. The music that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, a lament for lost love, a yearning for days gone by. Hassan closed his eyes, transported back to happier times, memories of his wife filling his mind. He saw her dancing in the moonlight, her laughter echoing through the palace halls. He felt her hand in his, her touch a gentle reassurance. When the music ended, he opened his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Afsana sat. Silently, her gaze lowered, her fingers still resting on the strings of the oud. He thanked her, his voice thick with emotion, and left the room, the melody lingering in the air long after he was gone. These stolen moments, brief and tinged with melancholy, became a solace for Hassan, a fragile bridge between his past and his uncertain future. The Sultan's private garden, a hidden oasis within the palace walls, became their sanctuary, filled with fragrant orange blossoms and the gentle murmur of fountains. It offered a respite from the stifling formality of the court. Hassan would find Afsana there, tending to the flowers or simply sitting in quiet contemplation. He would join her and they would talk, their conversations a mix of shared memories and quiet observations. He spoke of his late wife, of her kindness, her laughter, the way she would fill the palace with light. Afsana listened patiently, her violet eyes reflecting his sorrow. She, in turn, spoke of her childhood, of the simple joys of life before she was sold into slavery. She spoke of her mother, a woman she barely remembered, but whose love she still felt in the depths of her heart. She never mentioned the sapphire ring, fearing it would bring unwanted attention, but she often found herself touching it, a tangible, linked to a past she couldn't fully grasp. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of a blossoming orange tree, Hassan spoke of his vow, his promise to never remarry. He spoke of the emptiness he felt, the fear of dishonoring his late wife's memory. Afsana listened, her heart aching for him. She understood his grief, the weight of loss that pressed down upon him. She, too, had known loss, the pain of separation, the longing for a life that was no longer within reach. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort, of shared sorrow. He looked at her, her touch a gentle warmth against his skin. He saw the compassion in her eyes, the understanding that transcended words. In that moment, a seed of hope began to blossom in his heart, a fragile tendril reaching towards the light after a long winter of grief. He began to bring her small gifts, a book of poetry, a silk scarf the color of the evening sky, a single perfect orange blossom plucked from the tree in his garden. She accepted them with quiet gratitude, her heart warming to his kindness. She, in turn, would leave him small tokens, a smooth stone she had found by the fountain, a feather shed by a passing bird, a single, perfectly formed orange blossom pressed between the pages of his book. These small gestures, unspoken expressions, of affection became their secret language, a silent acknowledgement of the growing bond between them. The garden, once a place of solitude and remembrance, began to fill with a new kind of energy, a gentle warmth that hinted at the possibility of healing, of new beginnings. The blossoms of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to unfurl in the Sultan's heart, promising a future he hadn't dared to imagine. The blossoming connection between Sultan Hassan and Afsana did not go unnoticed. Whispers, like tendrils of smoke, began to curl through the palace corridors. Servants, catching glimpses of the Sultan and the slave girl in the garden, exchanged knowing glances. Courtiers, ever watchful for shifts in power, speculated on the nature of their relationship. The rumors, at first hesitant and hushed, grew bolder with each passing day. Some spoke of the Sultan's growing affection for Afsana, his softened demeanor, the light returning to his eyes. Others, less charitable, hinted at impropriety, a dishonor to the late Sultana's memory. The court, a breeding ground for gossip and intrigue, buzzed with speculation. Lord Zahir, his ambition ever watchful, saw the growing connection as a direct threat to his plans. Afsana, a mere slave girl, was becoming an obstacle, her influence over the Sultan a dangerous unknown. He began to fuel the rumors, subtly twisting the narrative to paint Afsana as a manipulative temptress, preying on the Sultan's grief. He spoke of witchcraft and spells, suggesting that Afsana was using dark magic to ensnare the Sultan's heart. He reminded the court of Hassan's vow, his promise to never remarry, painting Afsana as a woman who sought to usurp the late Sultana's place. His words, laced with poison, spread through the palace like a creeping vine, choking the fragile blossoms of hope that had begun to bloom in Hassan's heart. Afsana, unaware of Zahir's machinations, felt the shift in the palace atmosphere. The servants, once friendly and open, now treated her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Their whispers followed her like shadows, their glances sharp and probing. She felt increasingly vulnerable, exposed, the walls of her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her. The fear, a constant companion since her childhood, returned with a vengeance, gripping her heart in its icy grasp. The palace, once a refuge from the harsh realities of the outside world, now felt like a gilded cage, the bars closing in, threatening to suffocate her. She longed for the peace of the garden, the quiet solace of the Sultan's presence, but even there she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the pressure of unspoken accusations. The whispers in the shadows, like the hiss of a serpent, threatened to destroy the fragile connection she had found with the Sultan, leaving her alone and exposed in a world of whispers and shadows. Lord Zahir sought out Sultan Hassan in his private study, a room filled with the comforting scent of leather-bound books and sandalwood incense. He found the Sultan staring out the window, his gaze lost in the distant mountains. Zahir approached cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. He began by speaking of matters of state, of trade agreements and border disputes, his voice smooth and measured. But his true purpose lay elsewhere, a venomous serpent coiled beneath the surface of his words. He gradually steered the conversation towards Afsana, his tone laced with concern. He spoke of the rumors swirling through the palace, the whispers of impropriety, the accusations of witchcraft. He reminded Hassan of his vow, his promise to honor the late Sultana's memory, his duty to his people. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice low and urgent, "the court is abuzz with talk of this slave girl. They say she has bewitched you, that she uses dark magic to influence your decisions. They say you are dishonoring your late wife's memory by showing such favor to a mere slave." Hassan turned from the window, his eyes clouded with doubt. He had heard the whispers, the veiled accusations, but he had dismissed them as the petty jealousies of a court hungry for scandal. But Zahir's words, spoken with such apparent concern, planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He thought of Afsana, of her quiet grace, her gentle touch, the way she seemed to understand his grief without words. Could it be true? Could she be using some form of magic to influence him? The thought, once absurd, now took root in his mind, fueled by Zahir's carefully chosen words. Zahir, seeing the flicker of doubt in Hassan's eyes, pressed his advantage. He spoke of the damage Afsana was causing to Hassan's reputation, the whispers of weakness and indecision that were spreading throughout the kingdom. He painted a picture of a sultan under the spell of a manipulative slave girl, a ruler who had forgotten his duty to his people. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "you must protect yourself from this woman. You must distance yourself from her before it is too late." Hassan, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions, remained silent. He loved Afsana, or at least he thought he did. Her presence had brought a measure of solace to his grieving heart, a flicker of light in the darkness of his loss. But Zahir's words, like the venom of a serpent, had poisoned his thoughts, twisting his affection into suspicion, his comfort into fear. He felt trapped, torn between his heart and his duty, between the woman who had brought him solace and the advisor who warned of her treachery. The seed of doubt, planted by Zahir's serpent's tongue, had taken root, and its tendrils were beginning to tighten around Hassan's heart. The palace walls, once a comforting embrace, now felt like the bars of a gilded cage. Sultan Hassan, plagued by doubt and fueled by Zahir's insidious whispers, had withdrawn from Afsana. He no longer sought her out in the garden, no longer requested the solace of her music. He issued orders restricting her movements, confining her to the women's quarters, ostensibly for her protection, but in reality to distance himself from the source of his turmoil. Afsana, unaware of the forces working against her, felt the shift in Hassan's demeanor. His warmth had turned to coolness, his gentle gaze replaced by a distant stare. She sensed his withdrawal, the unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air between them. She tried to understand, to bridge the growing chasm, but her efforts were met with silence, a wall of indifference that chilled her to the bone. Her days were now spent in the confines of the women's quarters, a world of silks and perfumes, of idle chatter and petty jealousies. The other women, sensing her fall from grace, treated her with a mixture of pity and disdain. They whispered, behind their hands, their words like needles pricking at her already fragile sense of self. She longed for the fresh air of the garden, the quiet solace of Hassan's presence, but she was trapped, a prisoner in a world she had never chosen. The oud, once her solace, now lay silent in the corner of her room. She no longer had the heart to play. The melodies that once filled her with joy now seemed to mock her sorrow. She spent her days staring out the window, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, longing for freedom, for a life beyond the palace walls. The sapphire ring, a constant reminder of her unknown past, felt heavier than ever. She would often touch it, tracing the smooth surface of the stone, a tangible link to a mother she barely remembered, a life she had never known. It was a symbol of hope, of a connection to something beyond her current circumstances, but it was also a source of fear, a reminder of the secrets that bound her, the unknown dangers that lurked in the shadows. The palace, once a refuge, had become her prison. The silks and jewels, the opulent surroundings, were nothing more than gilded bars, confining her, suffocating her. She was a bird in a cage, her wings clipped, her song silenced. She yearned for the open sky, the freedom to fly, but she was trapped, a prisoner of circumstance, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The cage of gold, though beautiful, was still a cage, and Afsana, its unwilling captive, felt the weight of its bars pressing down upon her, crushing her spirit, stealing her hope. Afsana, trapped and isolated, refused to surrender to despair. The injustice of her situation, the weight of the unspoken accusations, ignited a spark of defiance within her. She would not be a silent victim, a pawn in Zahir's cruel game. She would fight for her innocence, for the truth, for the fragile connection she had found with the Sultan. She began to observe the palace staff, searching for allies, for anyone who might offer a glimmer of hope. She noticed a kind old handmaiden, Fatima, who often brought her meals. Fatima's eyes, unlike the others, held no trace of suspicion or disdain, only a quiet compassion that resonated with Afsana's own sorrow. One evening, as Fatima cleared away the remnants of her meal, Afsana, driven by desperation, decided to take a chance. She showed Fatima the sapphire ring, the one that had so startled the Sultan. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Fatima's wrinkled hand went to her mouth, her eyes widening in surprise. She stared at the ring, her gaze fixed on the gleaming sapphire, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She looked at Afsana, her expression a mixture of shock and a strange, unsettling familiarity. Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Afsana explained how she had always worn the ring, a gift from her mother, a woman she barely remembered. She spoke of her life as a slave, the fragments of memory that hinted at a past she couldn't fully grasp. She told Fatima of the Sultan's reaction to the ring, the strange connection they had felt, the growing affection that had blossomed between them, now withered by whispers and shadows. Fatima listened intently, her silence punctuated by soft gasps and murmurs of disbelief. As Afsana finished her story, Fatima reached out and gently touched the ring, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the sapphire. "This ring," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "this ring holds secrets, secrets that could change everything." Her words, cryptic and unsettling, planted a seed of hope in Afsana's heart. It was a small seed, fragile and uncertain, but it was enough to fuel her resolve, to give her the strength to continue her fight for the truth. The seeds of rebellion, sown in the fertile ground of injustice, had begun to sprout, promising a harvest of hope in the barren landscape of Afsana's despair. Afsana, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation, sought out Fatima the next morning. She found the old handmaiden in the palace kitchens, her wrinkled hands busy kneading dough. Afsana approached hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fatima," she said, "you said the ring holds secrets. Please tell me what you know." Fatima stopped kneading, her hands hovering over the dough. She looked at Afsana, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Afsana's own. She sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Child," she said, her voice raspy with age, "these are dangerous secrets, secrets that have been buried for a long time." Afsana pleaded with her, her voice trembling with urgency. "I need to know," she said. "The Sultan, he believes the lies they are telling about me. He thinks I am using magic, that I am dishonoring his late wife. I need to clear my name. I need to know the truth." Fatima looked at her, her gaze softening with compassion. She saw the desperation in Afsana's eyes, the fear that gnawed at her soul. She knew the truth, a truth she had kept hidden for years, a truth that could shatter the delicate balance of the palace, a truth that could endanger her own life. But she also saw the strength in Afsana's gaze, the flicker of defiance that refused to be extinguished. She knew she could no longer remain silent. She took Afsana's hand, her touch surprisingly firm. "Come," she said, leading her to a small, secluded alcove in the kitchens. "Sit, child, and listen carefully, for what I am about to tell you will change everything." Fatima began to speak, her voice low and hesitant, her words painting a picture of a past long buried. She spoke of a young handmaiden, beautiful and kind, who had served the late Sultana with unwavering loyalty. She spoke of a forbidden love, a secret affair with a nobleman, a love that blossomed in the shadows of the palace walls. She spoke of a child born in secret, a child hidden away to protect her from the wrath of a powerful and dangerous man. Her words, fragmented and disjointed, tumbled out like pieces of a broken puzzle, slowly revealing a picture of a hidden past, a past that was inextricably linked to Afsana's own. As Fatima spoke, memories long suppressed began to surface in Afsana's mind, fleeting images of a kind face, a gentle touch, a lullaby sung in a soft, melodious voice. The fragments of her past, once scattered and meaningless, began to coalesce, forming a coherent narrative, a story of love, loss, and betrayal. The truth, like a hidden spring, began to bubble to the surface, promising to quench the thirst of Afsana's long-held questions, to wash away the shadows of doubt and fear. Fatima's voice trembled as she continued, her gaze distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. "The handmaiden," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Her name was Ilara. She was the kindest soul I ever knew, with a voice like a songbird and a heart as pure as the driven snow. She served the Sultana with unwavering loyalty, but her heart belonged to another, a nobleman of the court." Fatima paused, her breath catching in her throat. His name was Omar. Afsana's heart quickened. The name resonated within her, a faint echo of a memory, a whisper from a dream. She had heard that name before in the hushed lullabies of her childhood, a name spoken with love and longing. Their love, Fatima continued, was a dangerous secret, hidden from the prying eyes of the court. They met in secret, stealing moments of happiness in the shadows of the palace walls. But their happiness was short-lived. Ilara became pregnant, and the secret could no longer be contained. Fatima's eyes filled with tears. The nobleman, Omar, wanted to acknowledge the child, to give her his name, but Ilara refused. She knew the dangers, the scandal that would erupt if their secret was revealed. She feared for her child's safety, for the repercussions that would follow. "She confided in me," Fatima whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "She begged me to help her protect her child. She gave me this ring." Fatima pointed to the sapphire on Afsana's wrist. "A token of her love, a symbol of her connection to her daughter. She made me promise to keep the child safe, to hide her from the world, to protect her from him." Fatima's gaze sharpened, her eyes narrowing with a sudden intensity. "Lord Zahir," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. He was the one who discovered the affair. He was the one who threatened Ilara, who forced her to give her child away. He wanted to erase any trace of the scandal, to protect his sister's reputation, to maintain his own position of power. Afsana's mind reeled. Lord Zahir, the man who had poisoned the Sultan's mind against her, the man who had orchestrated her downfall. He was the one who had stolen her from her mother, who had condemned her to a life of slavery. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture of betrayal and cruelty. "Ilara," Fatima continued, her voice trembling, "she died shortly after giving you away. Heartbreak, they said, but I knew the truth. She died of a broken heart, a heart shattered by the loss of her child, by the cruelty of a world that had turned against her." Fatima looked at Afsana, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and a strange, fierce pride. "You, child," she said, her voice firm, "you are Ilara's daughter. You are the late Sultana's half-sister. And that ring is proof of your lineage, a testament to your mother's love, a key to unlocking the truth that has been hidden for so long." The truth, heavy and undeniable, settled upon Afsana like a mantle, a weight both crushing and liberating. She was not a nameless slave, a pawn in a cruel game. She was Ilara's daughter, a woman of noble blood, a woman with a right to claim her place in the world. The sapphire ring, once a symbol of her unknown past, now shone with a new brilliance, a beacon of hope in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of love and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. The weight of Zahir's accusations pressed heavily on Sultan Hassan. He paced his private study, the scent of sandalwood incense doing little to soothe his troubled mind. He thought of Afsana, of the joy she had brought into his life, the solace she had offered his grieving heart. But Zahir's words, like venomous whispers, echoed in his ears, casting a shadow of doubt over everything he had come to believe. Could it be true? Could Afsana be deceiving him, using some form of magic to manipulate his affections? He looked at the portrait of his late sultana, her gentle eyes seeming to question his actions. He had vowed to honor her memory, to remain faithful to their love. Was he betraying that vow by allowing himself to be drawn to another woman? A woman whose past was shrouded in mystery, but something within him, a deep-seated sense of unease, refused to accept Zahir's version of events. He had known Zahir for many years, had trusted him implicitly, but now a flicker of suspicion began to grow in his heart. Zahir's eagerness to condemn Afsana, his insistence on her guilt, seemed excessive. There was a desperation in his voice, a fervor in his accusations that did not ring true. Hassan stopped pacing, his mind suddenly clear. He would not be swayed by whispers and rumors. He would uncover the truth for himself. He would investigate Zahir's claims, examine the evidence, and judge for himself whether Afsana was guilty of the accusations leveled against her. He summoned the head eunuch, a man of discretion and unwavering loyalty. He instructed him to discreetly gather information about Afsana, her past, her arrival at the palace, anything that might shed light on her true nature. He also instructed him to investigate Zahir, his movements, his alliances, his motivations. He wanted to know everything, every detail, every hidden motive, every whispered conversation. He would leave no stone unturned in his quest for the truth. A plan began to form in his mind, a plan to expose the lies and deceit that had poisoned his court, a plan to protect the woman he had come to care for, a plan to reclaim his own peace of mind. He was the Sultan, the lion of his kingdom, and he would not be manipulated by whispers and shadows. He would roar, and the truth would be revealed. The head eunuch, a man named Hafiz, moved through the palace like a silent shadow, his eyes and ears open to every whisper, every furtive glance. He was the Sultan's eyes and ears, his most trusted confidant, and he carried out his duties with unwavering loyalty and discretion. He began by interviewing the palace staff, starting with the servants who worked in the women's quarters. He questioned them about Afsana, her demeanor, her interactions with the other women, anything that might suggest impropriety or the use of magic. He found nothing. The servants spoke of Afsana's quiet grace, her gentle nature, her kindness to those around her. They spoke of her skill with the oud, her ability to soothe troubled souls with her music. None had witnessed anything that could substantiate Zahir's accusations. Hafiz then turned his attention to the merchants who supplied the palace. He questioned them about the slave market, about Afsana's origins, about the circumstances of her sale. He learned that she had been sold as a child, her past shrouded in mystery. The merchant who had sold her to the palace had little information to offer, claiming he had purchased her from another trader who had since disappeared. The trail seemed to go cold, but Hafiz persisted, his instincts telling him there was more to the story than met the eye. He next focused his attention on Lord Zahir, discreetly observing his movements, his meetings, his conversations. He noticed that Zahir spent a considerable amount of time with a certain group of courtiers, men known for their ambition and their willingness to bend the rules to achieve their goals. He overheard snippets of conversations, veiled threats, whispers of conspiracy. He began to suspect that Zahir's accusations against Afsana were not born of concern for the Sultan, but rather of a deeper, more sinister motive. Hafiz discovered that Zahir had been unusually active in the slave market in the years leading up to Afsana's arrival at the palace. He had purchased several young girls, all of whom had mysteriously disappeared shortly after their arrival. He also discovered that Zahir had a network of informants throughout the city, men and women who kept him apprised of every rumor, every whisper, every secret. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a disturbing picture of a man who used his power and influence for his own selfish gain. Finally, Hafiz stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. He discovered a ledger hidden in Zahir's private chambers, a ledger detailing his financial transactions, his bribes, his secret dealings. Within its pages, he found a single entry that made his blood run cold. It was a record of a payment made to a slave trader, a payment for a young girl who matched Afsana's description. The date of the transaction coincided with the time Afsana had been sold into slavery. The evidence, though circumstantial, was damning. It pointed directly to Zahir's involvement in Afsana's fate, confirming Hafiz's suspicions that the accusations against her were nothing more than a carefully orchestrated plot to discredit her and maintain Zahir's own grip on power. Armed with this evidence, Hafiz returned to the Sultan, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the betrayal he had uncovered. The truth, like a hidden weapon, was now in the Sultan's hands, ready to be unleashed upon the serpent who had coiled himself around the heart of the palace. The tension in the palace hung heavy, thick as the incense burning in the grand hall. Sultan Hassan sat on his throne, his face an impassive mask, his eyes sharp and watchful. Lord Zahir stood before him, confident and smug, his voice dripping with false concern as he reiterated his accusations against Afsana. He spoke of her manipulative nature, her supposed witchcraft, her dishonor to the late Sultana's memory. He painted a picture of a court corrupted by a slave girl's influence, a kingdom teetering on the brink of ruin. As Zahir reached the crescendo of his accusations, the doors of the grand hall swung open. Afsana entered, her head held high, her violet eyes blazing with a newfound fire. She was no longer the timid slave girl who had served tea at the funeral feast. She was Ilara's daughter, a woman of noble blood, a woman who knew the truth. Fatima followed close behind, her wrinkled face a mask of determination, her eyes fixed on Lord Zahir. A hush fell over the assembled courtiers. All eyes were on Afsana as she approached the throne, her steps firm and unwavering. She stopped before Hassan, her gaze meeting his, the sapphire ring on her wrist gleaming like a beacon of truth. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I have something to reveal, a truth that has been hidden for far too long." She turned to face Zahir, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Lord Zahir," she said, her voice ringing through the hall, "you accuse me of witchcraft, of manipulation, of dishonoring the late Sultana, but the true dishonor lies with you. You who have woven a web of lies and deceit, who have used your power to crush the innocent, who have betrayed the trust of your Sultan and your kingdom." She held up her hand, the sapphire ring catching the light. "This ring," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "was given to me by my mother, Ilara. She was a handmaiden to the late Sultana, a woman of kindness and loyalty. She loved a nobleman named Omar, and from their love I was born." A gasp rippled through the court. Zahir's face paled, his eyes darting nervously from Afsana to the Sultan. "Lord Zahir," Afsana continued, her voice rising in power. You discovered my mother's secret. You threatened her, forced her to give me away, to erase any trace of the scandal. You sold me into slavery, condemning me to a life of servitude, a life stripped of my birthright. Fatima stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. I can attest to the truth of Afsana's words, she said. I was Ilara's confidant. I witnessed her love for Omar, her fear of Zahir, her heartbreak at being forced to give her child away. This ring, she pointed to the sapphire on Afsana's wrist, was entrusted to me by Ilara. It is a symbol of her love for her daughter, a testament to her noble blood. Afsana turned back to Hassan, her eyes filled with tears. Your Majesty, she said, her voice choked with emotion, I am not a manipulative slave girl. I am Ilara's daughter. I am the late Sultana's half-sister. And Lord Zahir, she turned back to face him, her voice ringing with accusation, is the one who has betrayed you, who has lied to you, who has used you for his own selfish gain. Sultan Hassan rose from his throne, his face a mask of fury. The silence in the grand hall was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the incense burners. He looked at Zahir, his gaze cold and hard as glacial ice. Zahir, he said, his voice low and dangerous, you have betrayed my trust, you have dishonored my late wife's memory, and you have condemned an innocent woman to a life of slavery. His voice rose, echoing through the hall. You have lied to me, manipulated me, used me for your own twisted ambitions. You have poisoned my court with your whispers and your deceit. He turned to Afsana, his gaze softening with compassion. Afsana, he said, his voice gentle, I believe you. I see the truth in your eyes, in the courage of your words. You are not a slave, you are a woman of noble blood, a woman of strength and resilience. You are my wife's sister, and you deserve to be treated with the respect and honor due to your birthright. He turned back to Zahir, his fury reignited. Guards, he roared, his voice thundering through the hall. Seize this traitor, strip him of his titles, his lands, his power, confine him to the dungeons, and let him face the consequences of his treachery. The palace guards, clad in gleaming armor, moved swiftly, surrounding Zahir, their hands gripping the hilts of their swords. Zahir, his face ashen, his eyes wide with fear, offered no resistance. He had been exposed, his lies and deceit laid bare for all to see. His ambition, his lust for power, had brought him nothing but ruin. Hassan watched as Zahir was led away, his heart filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He had trusted Zahir, had considered him a friend, a brother. But now he saw him for what he truly was, a serpent in his garden, a viper in his bosom. He turned back to Afsana, his gaze filled with warmth and admiration. He took her hand, the sapphire ring gleaming between their intertwined fingers. Afsana, he said, his voice filled with emotion, justice will be served. You will be restored to your rightful place. And I, he paused, his voice softening, I will do everything in my power to make amends for the wrongs you have suffered. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dawning of a new era, an era of truth and justice, an era of hope and healing. The lion had roared, and the serpent had been vanquished. The palace, once shrouded in shadows, was now bathed in the light of a new dawn. The news of Zahir's treachery and Afsana's true lineage spread through the palace like wildfire. The courtiers, once so quick to whisper accusations against Afsana, now buzzed with astonishment and a touch of fear. Some were genuinely remorseful for their hasty judgments, while others, their ambitions thwarted by Zahir's downfall, scrambled to realign their loyalties. The palace, once a hotbed of intrigue, was now a place of uncertainty. The old order shattered, the future unclear. Sultan Hassan, his heart lighter than it had been in months, summoned Afsana to his private chambers. He greeted her not as a slave, but as a woman of noble blood, a woman deserving of respect and honor. He apologized for the injustice she had suffered, for the doubt he had allowed to cloud his judgment. He presented her with a beautiful gown of silk and gold, a symbol of her restored status. He then declared, in a voice that resonated with sincerity, that he would formally acknowledge her as the late Sultana's half-sister and restore her to her rightful place within the royal family. The announcement sent shockwaves through the court. Some whispered that the Sultan was dishonoring his late wife's memory by embracing her illegitimate half-sister. Others questioned the wisdom of elevating a former slave to such a high position. But Hassan remained steadfast in his decision. He had seen the truth in Afsana's eyes, the purity of her heart, and he would not be swayed by the whispers of those who clung to the old ways. He then did something even more unexpected. He confessed his love for Afsana, a love that had blossomed in the midst of grief and uncertainty, a love that had defied the boundaries of class and circumstance. He asked her to be his wife, not as a replacement for his late sultana, but as a companion, a partner, a woman who had captured his heart with her kindness, her strength, and her unwavering spirit. Afsana, her heart overflowing with emotion, accepted his proposal. She had found love in the most unexpected of places, a love that had freed her from the shackles of slavery, a love that had given her a new beginning, a new dawn. She knew that their union would be controversial, that it would challenge the traditions and expectations of the court. But she also knew that their love was true, that it was strong enough to withstand the storms of gossip and intrigue. She looked at Hassan, her violet eyes shining with love and gratitude, and she knew that together they would face the future, hand in hand, their hearts united, ready to build a new dawn for themselves and for their kingdom. The wedding of Sultan Hassan and Afsana was a grand affair, a celebration of love and renewal that echoed through the palace and beyond. The marble courtyard, once draped in mourning cloth, was now adorned with vibrant silks and fragrant blossoms. Music filled the air, replacing the hushed whispers of grief with the joyous melodies of celebration. Guests from all corners of the kingdom came to witness the union, their faces a mixture of curiosity and awe. Despite the lingering whispers of disapproval from some corners of the court, the joy of the occasion was undeniable. Afsana, radiant in a gown of ivory and gold, stood beside Hassan, her violet eyes shining with happiness. The sapphire ring, once a symbol of her hidden past, now sparkled on her finger, a testament to her newfound freedom and her rightful place by the Sultan's side. Their marriage was not just a union of two hearts, but a symbol of a new era for the kingdom. Hassan, inspired by Afsana's compassion and her own experiences, vowed to bring about meaningful change. Together, they established an orphanage in the late Sultana's name, a place where children who had lost their families could find shelter, care, and a chance for a brighter future. Afsana, remembering her own years of servitude, championed the cause of the less fortunate. She worked tirelessly to reform the kingdom's slave laws, advocating for fairer treatment, improved living conditions, and opportunities for education and advancement. Her efforts, supported by Hassan's authority, brought about significant change, bringing hope and a measure of justice to those who had long suffered in silence. The palace, once a place of shadows and secrets, became a beacon of hope and compassion. Hassan and Afsana ruled together, their love a guiding light, their shared vision a source of strength and inspiration. They honored the late Sultana's memory, not with grief and solitude, but with acts of kindness and a commitment to creating a better world. Their love story became a legend, whispered in the courtyards and sung by the bards. It was a tale of second chances, of the enduring power of the human heart, a testament to the transformative power of love. It was a story that inspired hope in the hearts of the downtrodden, a story that reminded everyone that even in the darkest of times, love could blossom, bringing light and healing to a world in need. And so, the Sultan, who had vowed never to remarry, found love again, a love that not only healed his own broken heart, but also brought about a new dawn for his kingdom, a dawn illuminated by the legacy of their love.